So welcome, Jack Morrigan. It's lovely to see you here. I'm in the UK and Jack is joining us from Berlin.
That's right.
Yeah, and Jack is here to talk to us today. Jack and I are just going to have a conversation, and we're talking about practical spirituality. So, so I'm interested to talk to you, Jack, because Jack and I met on spiritual retreats. We were working with the same spiritual teacher, Francis Bennett. So we feel very connected through that shared history. And so recently, Jack, you've been really exploring your own practice as a practitioner and a healer and a teacher. And so we're interested at the Hamblin Vision in exploring what does practical spirituality look like, and how do we as people, I guess, choose or I don't know, curate's not the right word, but for me, like personally, there just always seems to be so much choice of things that we can do, so many different practices that we can integrate into our lives. But I'm interested to hear from you what's your sense about how we go about integrating our spiritual understanding into daily practices, things that we do every day.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to connect with you always, Mike, and we've known each other for a while now, and I always thought it was interesting that we have the same birthday but 10 years apart.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting.
Like how to integrate things into everyday life. I think it's a really important question, because sometimes there's a disconnect between our spiritual life and the rest of our life. And for me, this is something that I'm always working on. I think it's a constant work in progress. And I think Fran used to say, like, that's where the rubber meets the road. Yeah. Like in your actual life, it's like, okay, you can have these big experiences, but like, how's that actually showing up in your life? And that's a really important question for us to ask. And I feel like the big question is like, okay, where is it not showing up in my life? Like, okay, I may have these periods of real deep inner peace and clarity about who I am and the nature of the world. But where do I lose that? Like, where do I lose consciousness? And for me, and I think probably for a lot of people, relationships is a big area where I lose consciousness and where I'm constantly being challenged by the people that I know. Like I was in a romantic relationship with somebody recently, and it was very difficult. Like it was one of those challenging relationships that felt like there was a strong kind of push-pull kind of energy, which was quite destabilizing, and that was evoking a lot of this unconsciousness in me. And noticing that, like noticing where I'm blaming them, and noticing where like I don't feel like I'm good enough. Like all of these things that are really like out of alignment with our truth, and I'm being shown them in the mirror of this relationship. I remember when we were separating, when we decided to do that, like I have a pattern where I cling on to people in relationships. Like I had an insecure upbringing, so I have this insecure attachment style, and I'm wanting to cling on to people. I don't want to let them go. But it felt different this time. It felt like I was being given an option. Like my consciousness had reached a level where I could actually see these processes happening, and was given a choice. Like, do I want to start blaming them, start trying to manipulate them and lead them into a relationship with me? Or am I going to let love win today? That was the phrase that came to me at the time. will I let love win today? And with the support of a wise friend, I was able to do that. It was very tempting to go back into the unconscious spiral, but I chose not to. And I chose to allow them to leave without any bitterness from myself, so that love won. And that was a revelation in itself, because it revealed to me that my own nature is love, and that by letting love win, I was actually allowing myself to win. That's an example of it going well. There's plenty of examples of it not going well.
Would you say so? That's really, I think that's really relevant at this, I don't know, this point in human history, and particularly around spiritual study and spiritual teachings. They are becoming more mainstream. I mean, mindfulness is something that people can ask for on the NHS now. That wasn't available when I would have needed it in my 20s on the NHS. But so what you say about reflecting on where we are, where we're not in that space of, I don't know, skillful functioning. Fran always used to say that as well, actually, which I thought was really helpful, that actually these practices and meditation, contemplation, and reflection is really about living more skillfully, not becoming like superhuman, incredible, beings, but actually that it helps us live more compassionately and skillfully. And so I think you posted as well on Facebook today this question of, where are you going into unconsciousness? Where are you in your lives? Where are we? It's a really good question to ask. In what areas of my life do I fall into egocentric patterns, or fall into patterns of behavior that are just not serving me or serving the people around me? And so I think that in itself, we could say is an ongoing practical spirituality, that if we stop and pause and reflect and look at the areas of our lives that are causing us difficulty and that they're asking for attention. So I'd agree with you. In my own life, I think relationships are a real test of just my groundedness, a test of where I've come from and what I've learned, and how it's integrated, right? Because I think that's probably when people really start to make the connection between what they feel in states of transcendence or meditation. They make the connection between that and the daily living of their life, interacting with the world. When you write, sometimes you write from that place of real stillness, and it has a completely different quality. Even the experience of it feels different. So I think people are making the connection now that, well, yeah, we have to consistently, like you say, I like that. I think that's very accurate for most of us, that it's an ongoing adjustment. The other thing you mentioned was that you spoke to a friend. You asked a friend to be there and to witness you and to accompany you in choosing a new way, which again, I would say it doesn't sound fancy, but actually that could be called a practical spirituality. It's finding people around you that you can trust, that you feel safe with, who are going to accompany you or us or whoever in making changes and doing things differently. So I think that's really helpful.
It was interesting. The one of the phrases that she said that really helped me was, "No one can take your love for her away from you." And what I realized was that I feared losing love, like the love that I was feeling within myself. So the reason that I'm describing this is because it kind of links spiritual teachings like into our everyday life, but through understanding that and living it, the teaching itself becomes brighter and more real. Like I realized that I project the love that I am out onto others and then feel unfulfilled. But I'm creating that situation. So I can pull that back in and realize that actually I have everything that I need because I'm already everything that I need. But that's a constant process for me. Like I was doing that today with somebody, like talking to them about like how I was projecting things onto them and how like I need to realize, you know, myself, see myself doing that. But it makes those teachings real. That's what I'm trying to say. Like it makes them real.
I agree. So for me, there's been situations where, so another one where I very easily can quickly go into unconscious, you know, old patterns, you know, old patterns of thinking and behaving is around money and around security, which has always been a tricky thing for me. And I've often been in very real situations where there's been a lot of scarcity. And so that feels, it's always felt very difficult to me to really drop into the sense of abundance, of the abundance of who we are, like the abundance, you know, abundance as part of our nature, when there's not very much actual abundance, when there's a lot of very real scarcity around. And so still I have issues with that. And that's something that I am finding that the more that I turn that attention really to these topics where it's still a bit, you know, it's a bit knotty, you know, like I can very easily tense up around money, and usually the thoughts are there's not enough, you know, how am I going to survive, you know, oh, it's not fair that I have to do this all on my own, you know. That's the sort of recent one, is like, oh yeah, other people have partners or families, or you know, other people have got, like, you know, a way to collaborate, and I've got to do all of this on my own, it's not fair, or that sort of thing. But interestingly, and I'm sure many people have this experience, the more that I just surrender. So for me, I guess surrender is a really ongoing spiritual practice, admitting that, well, sometimes I can't do it, and that's okay, you know, like, okay, I can't manage this. You'll get, I'll often say, God seems okay to me these days. I didn't like using the word God for a long time, but it feels much more comfortable now. And I just say, I can't do this. You're going to have to drive. You know, I can't do it. You'll have to take over. And so then I just do the closest things to me, the things right in front of me, and just trust. And it's really hard, like, you know, because I want to get in there and control it and make things happen. But each time I do, things ease. It's like something comes through, work comes, you know, an offer of a website design job, or, you know, some extra hours for the work that I'm doing with the charity, and things start to flow again, but only when I just, you know, stop getting in the way of it. So that's a huge practice for me, and I think you're right that when we make these teachings real, Fran used to say, like, I mean, she always used to say, none of this has any, what's the point of any of this if it's not making a better world? Like, you know, if it's not actually addressing things that aren't working for us, what's the point? You know, she said, why? It's just spiritual entertainment. You know, if it doesn't have like a real world practical application. And yeah.
Something I think is important that we're doing here is, you know, like we're two people who have been interviewed on various, you know, spirituality, programs, like, and speak publicly and have spoken publicly about our awakening and what awakening means to us and all of this kind of thing. And I think I've inherited this from Fran, like that we all need to be honest, like especially people who are in a position where we are being viewed as some type of spiritual authority, like someone who knows something about this. And just by being interviewed, it creates that stage. Like we have a responsibility to be really honest about our humanity. and the ways that we struggle, because there's so many people who struggle in their lives because they're trying to live up to an unattainable standard that's put forward by spiritual teachers who are, to be honest, being dishonest.
Yeah, or allowing, yeah, exactly, or allowing that illusion to just play out, not correcting it. I completely agree. And for me, it's always felt just the natural thing to do, to dispel the myth that I've arrived, that I've sorted it out, or that you know, that I'm a master at this, you know, because I see, and I said that actually in a really early interview, and I can't remember where it was, and I may have actually written it, I can't remember, but that initially the sort of insights that were coming to me in those early days, and it happened a lot because I meditated a lot, you know, I mean, I practiced a lot of just sitting and just watching this moment, watching myself, but that itself wasn't so much about mastery, you know, that was just already complete. Everything else like was about mastering the art of being a human being, you know. And I've always been very honest about the fact that I have not mastered that, you know. I haven't, you know, and some people are great at it, and that's fine. But my sense is that we all, every person, every spiritual teacher, you know, and Fran used to say that, well, naturally we're in a human body, you know, so we're going to continue to have those human issues, you know, the suffering is part of the deal, you know. But I think you're right, it is really important, because I speak to so many people who, like you say, they feel they can't reach that ideal, and so they're often holding themselves back because they think, well, I don't get it the way that they do. And I often think, yeah, you do, because actually you're imagining that other people, like writers of books or people who lead retreats, you're imagining that they're in this incredibly, I think there's just this, it's so persistent, the sort of belief, the dream that there is a way that we can be that doesn't suffer. It's really persistent, isn't it? And I think that people, you know, get stuck in that. So I think you're right. If spiritual teachers or anyone who has any sense of platform or authority, or, you know, a voice in this environment, it's really important for us to say, look, I struggle. These things, I have to work on this all the time, you know. I think the difference is that what struck me about your story as well, about the relationship ending, is that, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is that this is how it is for me. The more I turn my attention to the completeness that's already here, the more that I dwell upon and contemplate just awareness itself, or being, silence, stillness, all of those things, the more that becomes, turning to that dimension, if you like, just becomes more of an obvious choice in times of, you know, stress and strain, or times when we are maybe really tempted to go into unconsciousness, like troubles in relationship, or the things that you know, twist our buttons, twist a button, push our buttons, like those knotty things that kind of like that knotty thing that I go, and then bang, you're into that conditioned response. Because years ago, so this is worth saying as well, I think that years ago that happened almost all the time. You know, if something pushed those buttons, I'd immediately go into the conditioned responses, either the drama, the unhelpful stories in the head, and then of course you just create more mess out of it. Whereas with sort of time and practice and just contemplating more, and not every time, sometimes I'll go into those unconscious behaviors, but actually the other option becomes more obvious the more we practice. I think the more we sit, the more we allow that space to be.
I think that's true. And there's some really important points here. Like, so I want to come back to using the body as a compass which is one of my key ways. But I'm emphasizing that it's a great way for me, and it will be a great way for some other people. But I want to just cycle back to what we were saying about like making assumptions about spiritual teachers, like that they've kind of got it all figured out, or some spiritual author or something. And I think there's, we've been very conditioned into these linear ways of thinking, where we go, okay, that person is what awakening is. Like I remember with Eckhart Tolle, like he was the person who I saw first, and he, just looking at him triggered an awakening for me. And then when I started doing more things like working on my humanity, I turned away from Eckhart Tolle because I felt that his teachings weren't so focused on that. And then I've come back to him recently, actually, like, and really I'm loving his teachings again. But at that, because he was the first person that I came across, and he talks very authoritatively about what awakening is. He says, this is what it is. It took me a really long time to realize that he is expressing an opinion. A really long time, like, because he's such an authority. He speaks so eloquently and clearly and with certainty, and so many people adore him. It took me ages to realize that, like, he's speaking with certainty about his experience. And there are other people who have very different forms of awakening who can speak with just as much eloquence and authority, and it looks very different. And I've started to understand that actually there are so many ways that we can awaken. And many of us, I feel, are trying to fit ourselves into a shape that doesn't actually fit us. Like, we have a natural way for ourselves to awaken. And it's not going to look exactly the same as one of these teachers, and it might look very different. And it can create a lot of confusion and disappointment, and kind of chasing something that isn't really our fit. And it's more about finding our fit than it is about being like a teacher.
So you mentioned the body, and I haven't done an awful lot of that work in terms of spiritual work. I've done, well, years ago when I was an actor, we did lots of physical movement where we had to be very present, and tutors would often say to us, you're not in your body, be in your body. And what they meant is that they could see that our mind was elsewhere. We were doing the moves, but we weren't in our body. So those sorts of practices make sense to me, but I haven't actually done a lot of them in a spiritual context. So would this be a good link into the work you're doing at the moment? Because you mentioned about noticing the body and noticing awareness in the body. I think that's what you might have been saying. But is there a link between that and the type of healing work you're doing now? Would you talk to us about that?
There's definitely a link to that, yeah, because the direction that my awakening has gone down. So this is something that not that many people talk about, but generally awakening is considered this upward movement, even if it's not explicitly said. Whereas for me, it's mostly been a downward movement, so into the earth. So I feel the spirit of the earth, our living world, and I feel it and relate to it in a way similar to how other people would relate to God. It's a presence that I feel, but it's very specifically located beneath my feet, inside the earth. And I think of that as the divine feminine, the feminine principle. I can also feel like a masculine above quality, but I'm more rooted in the earth. That's how my awakening has gone. It's taken me a long time to realize that's how I'm supposed to be.
Well, and so Fran spoke about that, right? Full circle awakening was waking up out of transcendence, and then the return movement was imminent. Was actually she talked about that as the Christ element, that actually you are then bringing that consciousness into the earth, into your body.
And I think it's like a layer beneath that, it's like into the body, but then down below the body. Like indigenous people talk about this, like, and connecting with Mother Earth, and in some of the esoteric traditions they talk about this with the anima mundi, with the spirit of the world. I actually even heard Eckhart Tolle talking about this recently, like that there is a greater soul than our soul, which is the soul of the world. So that's really where I'm focused, and a lot of the work that I do with people is I'll be talking to them about some kind of anxiety that they have, and they share that with me. And as they're sharing and I'm listening to them, I'm feeling these subtle flows of energy inside the world. And I'm opening up different portals and channels of consciousness so that the problem that they're facing is being witnessed by an awareness like that's greater than themselves, like our shared awareness is working together. And I can perform these energetic techniques, maybe, where I allow their body to become reconnected with the world. Most of us are actually very disconnected.
Sorry to interrupt. Is that something that you guide, if a client's working, you guide them through that, like that you do it together, like you expand your awareness and then you explain what you're doing to the other person?
Yeah, I kind of explained it at the time. Like, I usually just describe what I'm feeling. Like, okay, thank you for sharing that. I can feel the spirit of the world beneath us, and I can feel these specific flows of consciousness that are linked to your problem. Like, would you like to be reconnected with these flows of energy? Because that way, our bodies aren't really designed to process the amount of challenge that we face. We are, even biologically, even within the scientific fields, it's not too difficult to realize that we are actually a part of this world. We have evolved, our body has evolved out of the world. And if you can take the leap to consider that maybe this world is actually a living being, and that we are like cells in the body of that living being, then things start to make more sense. Like, for me, healthcare starts to make more sense. Like, okay, maybe my body's suffering because it isn't receiving all of the help and support and resources of the body, like of the world.
Yes.
And I remember Fran talking about this kind of more in the spirit direction, where she was like, if you got a drop of poison and you put it in a small bottle, it's really concentrated and harmful. But you take that same amount of poison and you put it in the ocean, and it becomes completely harmless. Exactly. And what I'm talking about is the same thing, but just from the physical direction. So instead of the spirit direction, it's from the physical direction.
That's incredible, because I think that more and more of these practices are helping people, and it does seem to be going in that direction, into the body and into the body of the planet. Fran used to say, well, there's two things actually that spring to mind. You probably heard her say, the world needs your awakened heart. She'd often say, it's waiting. The world, meaning the planet and the body of humanity. It's been waiting for your heart to awaken. The world needs your awakened heart. And the other thing that sprung to my mind when you were talking about the soul of the planet, Thich Nhat Hanh, I never could say his name that well, but the monk from Plum Village, there's a recording, one of these guided recordings, and he says in it at one stage, and it's about connecting with Mother Nature, and he says, just spend time listening to the cries of nature. Like, it was really, he was saying, the planet, the trees, all of the animals and the beings are suffering. So just listen to them cry, hear them, hear the sob and the cry, hear the sadness of the planet. And that was so moving because it was like genuine, and he was just such a beautiful soul himself. But again, that feels like that we need that. Like, we're at a stage in human history and the history of the planet that it's now's the time for these approaches.
And there's something that's so essential to my mind, which is to realize that we are this living world. Sometimes I hear people talk about these things, and they want to care for Mother Earth. They see Mother Earth as alive and they want to care for her. But there's this separation, like, well, I'm a human being here and I'm going to care for Mother Earth. And it's like, no, that's not actually how it is. Like, you are Mother Earth. Your consciousness is her consciousness. And to realize that more and more deeply is to unite yourself with the world. And that's when I think of like ecology, activist movements and all these kinds of things, I feel like that's a very significant missing piece in many forms of these desires to do good. Like, if you are perceiving, if your knowing of yourself is separate from the world, there's always going to be some kind of limitation to what you're doing. Like, your action, your wisdom for the world's good needs to come from the world herself. She's the one who knows what she needs. So we need to be able to receive that. And this is what Indigenous communities have been doing for hundreds, if not thousands of years, receiving that knowledge. And I love that you mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh, because I feel like he is one of the very few teachers from one of the major religions who will talk about the earth in this way. Like, I feel like he really understands. I heard him talking about the sun, and he was like, you know, you are the sun, you are the sunlight. And it's like, he gets it. He really gets it.
That's lovely. Oh, it's so nice to connect this way, and I'm really excited to share our conversation with our community at the Hamblin Vision, and to anyone who is drawn to it and who finds this video. So Jack, just remind us of the name of your website, or the address of your website if people want to visit it.
It's myrisingrose.com. My Rising Rose. I do lots of interesting things like channeling beings, and the reason it's called My Rising Rose is because I channel beings that are called the dragons of the Rising Rose. And you know, that's a huge conversation for another time.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. So anyone who's watching, listening, and if you want to know more about Jack's work and connect with him, do visit the website myrisingrose.com, and you can find Jack on Facebook, and anyone who's interested in the work that we're doing at the Hamblin Vision, you can find us at thehamblinvision.org.uk. And this has been so nice to connect this way, Jack. So thank you for that discussion. We could talk all afternoon, I'm sure.
Easily.
And maybe we will one day if I can get a ticket out to Berlin and come and visit you.
You'd be very welcome. You'd be very welcome.
Yeah, and this is the Sacred Heart that Fran got for me. This thing here.
Oh.
She brought that back on one of her trips from somewhere, and she just presented it to me. She said, "That's your Sacred Heart."
Oh. Well, she's lovely. I miss Fran.
I miss her a lot. Yeah. But you know, she's living on in us and anyone who she touched, which is nice.
I know.
So great to see you. And yeah, have a good afternoon, and yeah, we'll speak soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye bye for now.
Bye, Jack.